our WNST TV channel on YouTube. The Orioles keeping our tube on quite late here this week out on the West Coast for a week's worth of games in the Bay Area from Oakland across to San Francisco. Wish I were there, but instead I will be here tweeting, blogging, opining, and doing all of those things at WNST and WNST.net, including our social channels out on Twitter. But the all eyes on Thursday night, all eyes on the NFC champion Carolina Panthers coming to town to take on the Ravens. Joe Flacco may wave to the crowd. He may blow a kiss. He may take a couple of snaps. We don't know what's going on, but I know Cam Newton's coming up, and it's not to play beach volleyball. Here to talk all things Panthers, and he is a Red Sox fan, so he will get some relative abuse during this segment. He is Nathan Conley, host of the Call Up in Charlotte, CLT. You can find him at WFNZ, where one of my former tag team partners and one of the guys I'm very proud of, Chris McLean, works with Nate Conley down there in Charlotte. How's McLean doing, and how are you doing? And, I see you have a newborn or an infant child. You're a busy guy, Nate Conley, down there in Charlotte.
Yeah, I am. My daughter, Sophia, actually turned 10 months old today, so we definitely have our hands full with that
Dude,
one.
are the teeth coming in yet? Are you getting that slobbering, screaming thing yet?
Number 3 is in. She's working on number 4, so that's always fun.
Well, yeah, that's a screaming good time for the whole family for a few months now, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I said hands full and then sometimes feet full, whatever appendage we have free, we can. It's usually full of something with her.
Well, I'll tell you what, the Panthers are full of one thing. They're full of hope, and certainly the offseason probably left a lot of the fans there unsatiated. I mean, I was out in Santa Clara. I saw all those Panthers fans convincing me that the Panthers were going to win, on Friday and Saturday night in downtown San Francisco. The Cam Newton thing, look, I'm a detractor. I'm that guy. He's a WWE character to me, and I root against him. You know what I mean? Much like if I didn't like the Ravens, I would root against Terrell Suggs because he ain't my cup of tea. But all that being said, there have been guys on my teams I've liked or not liked. The big issue is what kind of quarterback he is, and through the regular season last year, he proved himself to really be a cut above. But they're going to be the targeted team this year. I don't think there's any doubt about that. And there have been some changes there. Not all of them have been positive in Carolina.
Yeah, absolutely. And it starts, obviously, with number 1, Cam Newton. You talk about, he's that guy. It seems like every one of the teams, whether it's the NFL or whatever sport that you follow, he's that guy when he's on your team that you love him. If he's not, he's easy to hate. So I think Carolina Panthers fans have finally gotten used to that. I think they've accepted it. They've embraced it. He's theirs, and they're willing to accept him for all his faults because he's starting to actually reach that potential now. You talked about last year living up to sort of all the hype as the number 1 overall pick, 15-1 in the regular season, a trip to the Super Bowl. But prior to that, he had a sub-500 record in the regular season.
He almost cost Riverboat Ron his job at one point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Year 3 of that experiment, head coach and QB combo. They were 1-3 after 4 games, and Gettleman, the GM here, has denied it, but there are several people that say they have sources where he was out in the NFL putting out feelers for other potential head coaching positions. So they were definitely looking. They didn't know if Ron Rivera was a head coach, so they were hoping Cam Newton would eventually round in for him. And sort of, I guess, Rivera embodies this whole sort of turnaround here with this whole franchise in the last few years. 3 now consecutive NFC South titles representing the NFC in the Super Bowl last year. So. But, yeah, it all starts with Cam Newton. This league, as you guys know, in Baltimore, more than anything else with Joe Flacco, you got to have a good one to have any sort of chance, and the Panthers finally found their guy. And you mentioned they're teeming with hope down here, and I think they're brimming with confidence for sure.
No doubt about that. Let's talk about Gettleman a little bit. I mean, you do sports radio there. How many hours a day are you on? You take phone calls from people. You're like that guy, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We're on live radio 6 a.m. to 7 p.m., so 13 hours a day, all day.
Yeah, I know that format real well. I sort of invented that sort of thing back in the 90s here, so I'm really familiar with that. Gettleman down there, here Ozzie sort of walks on water, right? We have a saying here, in Ozzie we trust. Dude, we're 21 years into this. He's made every draft pick ever. So he's responsible for all of it, right? I mean, literally all of it, from March Broden and Billick to Harbaugh through, all the pro personnel people, through every scout that's ever been hired, every player that's walked on the field, every card that's ever been turned in, every deal that's ever been made or not made, every contract that's ever been signed. And, they won the Super Bowl 3.5 years ago. We had a little parade here. It was kind of fun. And I locked myself in a room for 100 days, and I wrote a book on the Ravens. And everywhere I went, and this this was during the Combine in Indianapolis and calling around the people and agents and stuff. Boy, Ozzie Newsome's really kind of an unpopular guy amongst agents, right? He's got some former players that don't like him. I mean, Trent Dilfer and he kind of famously, had some issues at a reunion long after Dilfer was not brought back after the Super Bowl in 2001. I don't think you could be in that sort of position of hiring and firing, and I have been as well, where you're going to be popular with everybody and everybody's family and everybody's friends and everybody's buddies and all that sort of thing. Gettleman in particular really seems to have come through that Buffalo Bills school with Polian, then gone on through the Giants school with George Young and Ernie Accorsi. Gettleman is a hard ass, right? And whether it's Steve Smith, who they're going to build a statue for down there one day, that for whatever the opinion was, he couldn't coexist there, and he's done a nice job here. Thank you very much. We're appreciative and like him as well. But, this year it's Josh Norman, and, nobody's going to be bigger than the Shield down there. And I guess Gettleman, over 30 years now in the NFL, he's a hard ass, but he's also a really anonymous kind of hard ass, right? And most people don't know what he looks like.
Yeah, I think outside of Carolina, I think people are finding out about him. But you mentioned, they have that saying, "In Ozzie we trust," in Baltimore. Down here in Carolina, he's quickly getting sort of a cult following. And you hear that in Gettleman we trust. I mean, we heard it as radio hosts. We were talking about how, or me personally, not everyone, but I know Chris McClain, a guy that you worked with, was sort of along the same line of thinking of, man, this guy just seems to walk on water. He can do whatever he wants right now, and people just seem to be okay with it. He let a first-team All-Pro cornerback go in an offseason where they didn't have to do that, in a season where they're trying to go back to the Super Bowl and finish the job and actually win it this year. And it feels like, to us anyway, that follow this team, he's making that job more difficult than it needed to be by letting playing hardball with guys like Josh Norman. And then a lot of people thought, okay, Josh Norman's out the door. That frees up $14 million in cap space. Let's go out and sign our star-stud, young defensive tackle KK Short. You know what hasn't happened yet? He's playing on a $1 million contract, and they could be facing the whole franchise tag next year with him. And that just hasn't worked out well. As many things as he's done well in Carolina, the whole franchise tag thing hasn't worked out. They franchised Greg Hardy, and they franchised Josh Norman so far. So he's 0 for 2 in that regard, and KK Short is a guy that's severely outplaying his contract. And I know you guys up there in Baltimore, we have a lot of players around the league that holdouts and franchise tag and all the minutia that goes on with that. But it just feels like right now this is a big season for him, despite the early success for his tenure here in Carolina. And we talked about it. Look, 3 straight NFC South championships. They've exceeded expectations earlier than expected.
And the other teams all stink, too. That kind of helps, too, right? I mean, it really does.
Say that again.
The other teams in the division kind of stink. I mean, that kind of helps, too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
believe me, the Orioles are in first place right now, partly because the Yankees stink, right?
Yeah, and David Price, particularly for my Red Sox right now.
We'll get into that in a moment.
Soft spot, yeah.
That's my second foot. I got 2 feet here.
Yeah, but it goes back to when you have that elite level quarterback, you obviously have a better ability to compete, and that was kind of an odd year that you're talking about in year 2 with Gettleman, where Cam Newton was injured and he had the broken ribs and the off-season ankle surgery, and then had the car accident, and they only won 7 games, but you're right, the division was awful, and they ended up going to the playoffs, and they ended up winning a playoff game, crazy enough, in that season, the first one, because they were facing a third-string quarterback in Ryan Lindley, so in the Arizona Cardinals. So there's been some things that have really gone favorably for him, and I think he's reaped the rewards and benefits and a positive reputation in that regard, but I do think where this year they're talking about a completely revamped secondary, they haven't locked up the young studs long term. So I think this is a big sort of year for Dave Gettleman specifically, where I think it was everyone was on board with whatever he did. I think you finally started some people, throwing up a little bit of concern with the Josh Norman and the way that was handled, because you just mentioned if you get that reputation and you don't really maybe even have the sort of clout built up that a guy like Ozzie Newsome does, if you're turned off by, free agents coming there or agents don't want to deal with you, I think that can be ultimately detrimental. So I think that this is an important season specifically, not only for the team and the franchise and establishing themselves as a legitimate, consistent contender in the NFC, but also I think Gettleman, this is a really important year for him personnel-wise and some of the decisions he made this summer.
Well, and certainly with the cornerback and Josh Norman, far be it from me, we've never really had a player excel here who takes the piss so much with the franchise that they just got to get rid of him. Now, McAllister sort of wore out his welcome at the end, and, Billiken to Harbaugh with the change of coaches. But, the guys that we've had around here who can play, they stayed here forever, and they figured it out. And, Ray Lewis had a holdout many moons ago. There was finally a kumbaya. Obviously, Ogden, Ed Reed. I mean, we've watched these Hall of Famers the last weekend. Purple's going to be going out there a lot for Ray Lewis and Ed Reed down the line. I mean, they're definitely that's coming down the pike. But for him, for the offseason, I can't fathom, not our best player, because Cam Newton's your best player, but our second best player just like getting shown the gate, especially at an important position where the franchise is kind of maybe making a point to some degree to say he's not that important. Is he that important? I guess that we're going to find out when these young cornerbacks go out there and have to play, right?
There are a lot of intriguing storylines for the Carolina Panthers season coming up. As special as last year was, it just feels like there's some things that a lot of people are going to be paying attention to, and you mentioned it.
Well, let's start with, if you don't go to the Super Bowl, it wasn't as good a year. Let's start with that, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you start with that, and then how is Cam going to respond? You talk about last year, there wasn't a lot of expectations around that team. It was a team, that was coming off a 7-8-1 season. And
at one point, they were the worst 10-0 team in football, right? Ever, right?
Yeah, well, and even going back to last year around this time, Kelvin Benjamin went down early on in training camp, and we're sitting here talking about this team saying, hey, how are they going to score any points? Lo and behold, Cam Newton goes out and has an otherworldly year, puts that team on his back. They lead the NFL in scoring, amazingly enough. So there's going to be a lot to prove, and I know they played that no-respect card a lot last year, but it's going to be a much different approach to this season. Maybe not in terms of the approach, but they're going to be perceived a lot differently. You mentioned it already a couple times. They're going to have that target on their back. They're not going to take anyone by surprise this season.
He is Nate Conley. You can follow his journey out on Twitter at Nathan Conley. That's Conley. He is the host of the Call Up in Charlotte on WFNZ, and you can find him out on Twitter as well as out on his website. And when you find him on Twitter, you're going to find Big Papi. Don't let that scare you, okay? Looks like Big Papi is praying to the Big Papi in the sky with his red gloves on. And, my wife shares that disease you have, that Red Sox thing up there. So we're trying to get through that. But, for Cam Newton, speaking of good guys and bad guys, here in Baltimore, everyone hates David Ortiz, right? Because he smashed the phone.
Sure.
I did a tour last year. I did 30 ballparks in 30 days, and my only positive interaction with a baseball player on the whole tour, and I didn't have a lot of interactions, but I had a really positive interaction with David Ortiz, and I've become sort of a closeted fan of his because he was nice to me when he didn't need to be nice to me for no good reason other than he seemed like a pretty good guy. And all that, and I know what he's done for Boston and Boston Strong and winning championships, and, I don't know what kind of juice he's on, but I'm assuming it's not apple or orange at this point. Maybe it's grapefruit. I don't know at this point in his career. But Cam Newton has got 15 more years of this in him where he already has made me a guy that's probably going to root against him the rest of his career unless he becomes a Raven. And I think you've sort of drawn up the battle lines, and I saw a lot of that last year, January in Santa Clara when I was out there at the Super Bowl. Just tell people whether they root for him or against him. He's a guy you either root for or against. There's sort of no middle ground on him. How has the response been from your perspective, from the fans, from the when things go wrong, he's going to be the first guy who gets blamed. He won't be Superman anymore. He'll be looking for Wonder Woman at that point, right? Because that's just the way sports fans are. But he has proven to be a pretty temperamental fellow and, dare I say, a poor sport.
Oh, yeah, and, that's the first thing, he'll freely admit the poor sport part of it, and like you said, though, it's almost to a point now where there is no hot and cold on him, or it's all hot and cold. There is no lukewarm when it comes to Cam Newton. He's such a lightning rod right now, and he plays the game with sort of a unique type of flair and stuff. I don't think we see it often at the quarterback position. He's not so overt about it, so I think it's something different that we haven't seen before, which oftentimes turns people off. But I think the big thing, and this was kind of took a little bit of a backlash, but my personal opinion and just dealing with and talking about what happened in wake of the Super Bowl was, it just felt like to me it was handled improper. And look, everyone, he said, hey, just because I react this or everyone else acts a certain way doesn't mean I have to, which is fine. But, there have been 49 other quarterbacks who have lost the Super Bowl and no one's ever walked off, the interview stage before. So.
It reminded me of kind of an eighth grader. It was very, very childish. And no one around there really beat him up very much. I mean, I saw Ron Rivera. I was at the owners' meetings when, 2 months later, he's still defending it. I don't know how you defend the indefensible. I mean, we have a party doing that in America right now, too. But, so be it.
Without getting too deeply into the political race this election year. But, I look at that, and if you read Monday Morning Quarterback this morning, Ron Rivera was talking about that still very same thing and how he enlisted some of the help of, some great leaders, and he asked them how their opinions of how he handled the Cam Newton situation. And
did anybody tell him he did a good job?
Well, and if you read if you go to Monday Morning Quarterback, there was a general, I think, in the Navy that he talked to, and he said, look, he's like, I think how you handle it publicly is the way you want. You want to show support publicly, privately, you can maybe handle it differently. So I think Ron Rivera, as the quarterback and leader of his team, publicly and outwardly is expressing support. I think inwardly there were some conversations that went on after that happened and sort of some talks of, hey, you're the NFL MVP right now. This is sort of behavior that we'd like to curtail. So
Mr. Richardson probably doesn't like that, right? I mean, it really comes down to it, right?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Mr. Richardson probably doesn't like that, right?
Oh, yeah, and I think more than anything, I think some of those conversations were probably initiated at the command of owner Jerry Richardson. I think who placed a tremendous amount of faith and confidence in drafting Cam Newton overall. And look, here's the thing. It's not the worst thing in the world, right? He's not out there breaking any laws. He's not going out and doing it. He handled one of the worst moments in his life poorly, and I expect him to learn from that. I think some of the disappointing, interactions afterward was he came back, and then the Panthers were cleaning out the locker rooms and kind of doubled down on the whole attitude of, hey, if you don't like it, screw you, basically. So it was just one of those seasons, too, where all season long they were the ones that were getting sort of, a lot of vitriol was being aimed at them because of the way they handled themselves, because they were showboating while they were winning. And if you're going to be the guy that comes out in a press conference in Cam Newton and says, hey, if you don't like it, stop me, and then you get stopped on the biggest stage and you handle it the way he did, that's when you know the backlash is going to come. And he didn't want to deal with it. So I think he looked really, really small in that situation.
Nate, I disliked him before that. I mean, I spent the whole week of the Super Bowl beating him up, saying, if he loses, I wonder how he's going to handle it. And there it is. So therefore, I will root against them again this year. And certainly on Thursday night, I am rooting for everyone to stay healthy. You guys lost a lineman last week. Young guy, we lost one last week as well. And this is the time of the year when we send out those WNST news texts. We know it's usually not good news, right?
Yeah, it's definitely more than anything. And we were talking about it today on the air. These preseason games and player safety and the emphasis on that. It almost seems like they're non-essential anymore. And the only thing you're hoping for is that no one gets injured in these sort of situations in these games that ultimately mean nothing. So Thursday night I think it'll be fun. You're gonna see some younger players obviously on the field in week one. These guys battling and fighting to hopefully fulfill that dream of making the final 53-man roster, but most of the guys, up there, Flacco, Steve Smith, who I'm sure will have some nice waving and blowing of kisses, as you mentioned, Flacco might for the crowd in Baltimore. I think Steve Smith might be doing a little bit of that as well there to some of his old teammates, the few that are remaining. But, it's going to be fun, and it's just one of these seasons that you look at, you're excited for, and I think the Panthers right now, you look at that, and Panthers-Ravens going to be part of one of the first preseason kickoff games and getting you ready for the Panthers kicking off the entire NFL regular season in that game at Denver, which in of itself is going to be quite the spectacle with the Super Bowl rematch.
Yeah, it's going to be exciting Thursday night, right on up until the point where they kick off the ball. Then we realize, it's fake football. I forgot about it. Speaking of fake football, how about some real baseball? Now, you are a Bostonian, right? Newton, Mass, correct?
Norton, Mass.
Norton, Mass. Yeah. My bad. All right, so near enough to the Red Sox station. So if I give you $1 right now, which team are you going to put it down on? If I gave you 100 to 1, $1 wins you 100. You're going to win $100. Are you going to put it down on the Red Sox, the Blue Jays, or the Orioles? Who you got?
I think right now, and it's so difficult, I think, honestly, to determine with 50 games. I mean, as closely contested as it is.
It's great, isn't it? Isn't this nice? Three teams. It's fun, right?
It is, and it really is fun, and it's what makes being a sports fan. I mean, this is what's great about it, is if it's not competitive, it's not fun. And so, Chris McLean's an Orioles fan. We always go back and forth, too. We have a bunch of guys in the studio. They are Yankees fans, so we got a good AL East contingency that go back and forth and give each other a hard time. But it's hard for me not to go against Buck Showalter, and I think they have their flaws, but there's no perfect team in the AL East, obviously, right now. So I think when you're going up and down the rosters, I think you see, less and less flaws on that roster. And I think Showalter, you have to give the benefit of the doubt. I would take him over John Farrell right now, even though, he's won the World Championship. But, he really hasn't performed well outside of that season alone.
John Farrell will be performing a whole lot better if the $217 million pitcher could actually get guys out, right?
Yeah, and that's a good thing. When your players are playing well, they make the coach look good. But, yeah, that's the price conundrum right now is one that is so, and I can talk to you personally as a Red Sox fan, it is so unbelievably frustrating. I mean, everyone, Pedro Martinez, you hear all these analysts, on MLB Network say, oh, don't worry about price, he's going to figure it out. Well, when is that coming? And I know some, recent outings have been good, and the bullpen has blown it, and the back end of the bullpen is hurting right now for the Red Sox. But Price is really that guy they needed. That when you looked at the offseason moves, hey, he's going to solidify that rotation. They needed that ace at the top, and then you had Stephen Wright and Porcello exceeding expectations, but it just seems like, David Wright, 3-10 in his last 13 starts with the Red Sox. If they have any chance, any hope of getting the division and sneaking into a wild card, Price has got to find something here in the second half of the season to turn things around.
Good. I got one more guy I can call and yell at in September about the Red Sox. This is great, Nate.
Hey, man, good for that.
I appreciate you taking a little time coming on, man. It was definitely fun. Give my best to Chris McClain down there in Charlotte. We're going to send everybody out to your Twitter page at Nathan Conley so they can see your beautiful daughter here who hasn't screamed at all during the taping of this, right?
No, she has not. I was successfully able to get her down for the night's sleep, so that is always a good night.
Naps are a beautiful thing, aren't they?
Indeed.
Great having you on, Nate. Be well, man.
All right. Thank you, man.
You got it. Nathan Conley down there in Charlotte doing sports radio at WFNZ with one of my tag team partners of yesteryear, Chris McClain, who was one of my early interns in the 1990s. His program is called the Call Up CLT down in Charlotte, and you can find him on Twitter at Nathan Conley. That's Conley. You'll find it when you find Big Poppy on his spread as well. You can find me, Nasty, at WNST.net. I'm out on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, Snapchat, of course, our WNS TV channel, now streaming live on YouTube, as well as my Facebook page, streaming live on Facebook anytime we're doing radio here. And anything you miss, you can find in the Buy a Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. We're one click away. Anything we ever do on demand, when you want it, where you want it, how you want it. And, of course, in the morning newspaper at 7 a.m., it comes to your email inbox free of charge. Each and every morning, it is powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Last but not least, any breaking news this week from the West Coast with the Orioles, from the East Coast with the Ravens, it comes to you first on the WNST Tech Service. You'll always be the smartest person in the room. It's always brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. And Dennis will be driving you home and getting you ready for preseason football on Thursday night. He'll be here from 3 until 5 with the SSV on WNST. I'm Nestor. This is WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Taos in Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports. NST Taos.